For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking. For those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. We'll now begin with a roll call of all members, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the Transportation Policy Committee, I will go down the list of members alphabetically. Please unmute and indicate if you are present. Mayor Anderson?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Borowski?
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Butler?
Present.
Thank you. Jen Daniels? Thank you. Doug DeCluson?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Edwards?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Freeman?
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Gallego?
Here.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Garland?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Haney?
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Lesko? Councilmember Manfredi?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne?
Present.
Thank you. Tyler Pace? Mayor Pizzillo?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Poston?
Here.
Thank you. Mark Reardon? Jack Sellers?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wires?
I'm here.
Thank you. Chair Wheatley?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember White?
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson?
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Madam Chair, we have quorum.
Great. If you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Before we proceed, I would like to welcome back Jack Sellers, who has been appointed by the governor to represent our resiliency interests on the Transportation Policy Committee. So welcome back, Jack. Our next item is call to the audience. I have not received any requests to speak for the call to the audience. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to comment written via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Staff, have we received any written online comments for call to the audience?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have received no written online comments for the consent agenda or for any other item on today's.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to informational items. Items 4A through 4B are for information only. Do any members of the committee have any questions or request a presentation on any of these items? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is approval of the consent agenda. And items 5A through 5D are on the consent agenda. Do any members of the committee have questions or request a separate presentation on any of these items? There is the opportunity for members of the public to comment on any items on the consent agenda. I have not received any requests to speak, and we have not received any written online comments. Is there a motion to approve consent items 5A through 5D? We have a motion by Mayor Wires.
Second.
Second by Mayor Osborne. And for those participating in the meeting online, please take part of the voice vote by turning on your cameras. You know the routine, unmuting your audio. And for those that cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call vote. Staff will only call on those virtual participants who did not turn on their cameras. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed, nay. The motion does carry, and please leave your cameras on. Do we need a...
Excuse me. Yes, Madam Chair. Mayor Borowski, how do you vote?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, the motion carries.
Excellent. We will move on to items proposed to be heard, and the Arizona Department of Transportation Wrong Way Vehicle Detection Program update. And this item is on the agenda for information and discussion will be presented by Sarvini Duveni. Hopefully you can correct me with the right pronunciation there, but she is our transportation analysis and we'll be joined by Susan Anderson, our ADOT Assistant State Engineer. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Transportation Policy Committee. I'm Sarvani Duri, and I'm a transportation analyst from MAG, and I'll be introducing today Susan Anderson, who is the Assistant State Engineer from Systems Technology Group from the Arizona Department of Transportation, to present on their wrong way vehicle detection program. And just to give a brief background, in June 2017, the MAG Regional Council approved a pilot project for a wrong way detection system on a 15-mile corridor on the Interstate 17, incorporating various technologies to warn the drivers and also notify the law enforcement. And ADOT's evaluation of this pilot revealed the system successful and also highlighted the need to expand, and especially use of equipment such as the thermal cameras and also the illuminated wrong way signs. In March 2022, the MAG Regional Council also approved expansion of the system to cover a section along the State Route 202 near Tempe. And from that approval and expansion, ADOT has continued to grow the system and is included as part of future construction projects and also the roadway improvements. From that approval and expansion, it has been continued to expand on the improvement projects and also the new constructions. This presentation will provide an overview of the progress of the ongoing wrong way vehicle detection projects and also the system developments. And with that, I welcome Susan Anderson.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Policy Committee. Thank you very much for inviting ADOT to come present on our vehicle wrong way detection vehicle program. Missed it? It's tricky. Okay. Our program, as you're all very well aware, wrong way drivers is a nationwide problem, and Arizona, unfortunately, is not a number of research efforts were done many years ago. ADOT really wanted to investigate what type of countermeasures could be done and deployed. We particularly were looking at the types of technology that could be deployed within Arizona. Out of that research, ADOT did deploy a pilot project, as Sarvani mentioned, on I-17 between I-10 and Loop 101. That program has been operational since 2018, and we are very grateful for MAG's support on that. Out of that pilot, we are continuing to apply many of the lessons learned. If you're not familiar with our pilot project, it did deploy a number of transportation components that are fairly familiar within our transportation industry. The bulk of the program is centered around our thermal detection cameras. That is that round ball that you see in the middle of the screen. We also are working with wrong way signs that actually illuminate from inside, so they're very, very bright on the ramps. We also have the CCTV cameras, the dynamic message boards, and we coordinate with the ramp meters. Behind the scenes, there is actually a decision support system that is working within the Flux program software that the dispatchers, that ADOT and the DPS can have access to, and use that in order to activate the detection program. The I-17 pilot was laid out in this manner. So if you're not familiar, if a wrong way vehicle does enter the exit ramp, a camera does detect that. It takes a short 10-second video of that action that gets sent back to our traffic operations center. Dispatchers there will review the video and activate the decision support system if needed, if it is truly a wrong way event. When that thermal camera at the ramp actually detects a wrong way vehicle, the illuminated wrong way sign will come on in an attempt to get attention of that wrong way driver to get them to turn around. Otherwise, they can proceed on to the main line, which is not what we want them to do. However, the TOC dispatchers can activate the decision support system. By doing that, they will activate wrong way messaging on our DMS boards, as well as turn the cameras to where that wrong way vehicle entered. This allows us to really help notify DPS of where there is an event and help them to have a faster response to interact with that vehicle. The results of this pilot project, because this was just along the 15 miles of I-17, we found that definitely having detection of knowing where those wrong way events were happening allows us to notify DPS that much faster. And out of our analysis, we found that a high number of those drivers did actually turn around and self-correct. Only about 10% made it onto the main line. Since that first finding is really that detection was the key, we needed to know where wrong-way events were happening. We have continued to roll out these thermal cameras throughout the valley. This is a map that shows kind of where we're expanding with existing projects, as well as where funding becomes available. We want to continue to blanket the valley, if you will, and get every possible entry point. You'll see that I-17 is very well covered because that's our pilot area, but a number of other construction projects have continued to roll out these thermal cameras as we can. We're continuing to roll those out for ramp detection as well as along the main line. Current projects that we have underway are the Loop 101. We had the first section that was funded through MAG was to install wrong-way detection between 101, I-10 to Cardinals Way. That one actually has been completed. The second one was along the entire corridor of Loop 101, where we are actually mounting thermal cameras on our DMS boards. These are very stable devices that we can use for mainline detection. The Loop 101 project has been completed. We're doing a similar project that is in process along the Loop 202 corridor. Other projects, as you're aware, like I-10 Broadway Curve is going to be installing wrong-way with those as they become deployed. Behind the scenes, the decision support system was an effort that was deployed just with our pilot effort. This is essentially a figure that the Traffic Operations Center will get a video feed in from the thermal camera. And from that, they can assess whether or not a vehicle truly was going the wrong way and that notification needs to be deployed to DPS. If this is an actual wrong-way event, they will press the decision box that says yes, activate. And with that, DMS boards will be populated upstream with a warning to right-way drivers that there is a potential wrong way on that corridor, as well as turning the CCTV cameras toward where that wrong-way event occurred. So we can essentially automate a little bit of this system. This decision support system was only deployed with the I-17 pilot, but this past year, a big effort by ADOT is to deploy this system for all of the cameras that we have throughout the valley and the state. The current progress on that, as we noticed, our first pilot project was really to deploy that for the 90 cameras we had on I-17. Currently, we are deploying an additional 230 additional sites. With this added feature, we'll be able to save about 20 seconds of notification. And with emergency response, every second counts in saving that life. So we are very excited to have this underway. I apologize, the colors on the graphic kind of show the deployment of that. The different stages of integration with our IT staff, so we're aware of that. But just so you're aware, this rollout is happening for all of our thermal cameras that we have throughout the state. This will enable us to have better tracking for all of the locations because these locations will now be coordinated as well with our DMS boards and our CCTV cameras and provide us with ability to really give better information to DPS. Whoa, okay, that went too far. Apologize for that. All right. On the other side, ADOT is also working with to develop dashboards that we are using in-house. This one shows just on a monthly basis, we are monitoring the number of wrong-way incursions that are happening. For example, you can see the month of December, which is the last bar on this chart, we had a number of 75 incursions. However, the 7 that is in the red is how many actually made it onto the main line. You may be concerned with the numbers that appear to be going up. However, get the screen to work. That is because as we're rolling out the number of wrong-way devices throughout the valley, we continue to have more detection devices. Thus, we know more of what is happening. So we are able to actually monitor the system more and know that there is more wrong ways happening. On this one, you'll see that we have over 300 thermal cameras deployed within the state. Of those, that yellow line is the number of total incursions. The green line is actually those that actually self-correct on the ramps, and you'll see that that's a good high percentage. Our concern is always that 10%, that's that red line, that is showing that pretty consistently how many out of all the wrong ways of occurring are actually hitting our main line. To help us out to understand where this is happening, we have also deployed a performance metric understanding corridor level data. This is essentially creating a heat map for us so we know where wrong ways are happening. We also line this up with DPS as they get reports of incidents from 911 calls as well. Here you can see we have a number by corridors are hotspots. There's a location over on Loop 202 at the Maryland, actually Loop 101 on Maryland and one on 202 at Van Buren. We have 2 sites. We're very well aware of it. We're looking at some traffic engineering design considerations and restriping, trying to find any countermeasures that might help that. As we continue to roll out Wrong-Way, the operations and maintenance continues to be an issue for ADOT, of course. More locations just means more equipment to maintain over time. We continue to also have an increase of data that we're having to go through, scrub, make sure it's verified, but we continue to update these dashboards and monitor what's happening. On ADOT's side, this has been a opportunity for us to standardize our work in deploying an operations plan and specific training for our staff at the Traffic Operations Center. All of this is helping us to coordinate with DPS and provide better operations. With that, our conclusions, ADOT is going to continue to implement countermeasures as we can to mitigate Wrong-Way. I-17 pilot definitely provided with a lot of good lessons learned that we can deploy. Throughout, we're going to continue to deploy our thermal detection cameras. We found that they have been very successful in letting us know what is happening out there. And we will continue to try to enhance the system. So we're excited with having the decision support system updated this year. With that, we just see detection and notification really being our basis for continuing the Wrong-Way detection program. With that, I believe I'm handing it back over to Sarvani. If you're interested, our Wrong-Way detection pilot project was documented. It's out on ADOT's website. And if you need to contact me or Mr. Mark Salute at our TOC, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Madam Chair and members of the Transportation Policy Committee, this concludes our presentation. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Sarvani, and thank you, Susan. We appreciate the presentation. I look at a lot of what we do here, and it's to ease congestion in traffic, which is an annoyance, a nuance, right? But this speaks to the safety component and truly what a focus that is of ours, and recognizing that there is a high possibility of collision and even worse, fatality. And so such a great program. The self-correction is the area that I hit on the most, and that's ultimately our goal. And so it's great to see such great results with that. So is there any additional comments? Mayor Osborne.
Yep. Thank you. Great presentation. I appreciate that. And I don't remember growing up or as a younger driver, I don't know if that's right, ever really hearing about the issue. Is this an issue that's really come on in the last, say, decade or so?
I would say it's been much more aware that we are getting a lot more media coverage of this, so everyone is hearing about it. We were actually interested, since we're now having the cameras out, of really knowing how many of these events are happening. And part of that is just more knowledge for us. I don't know that it's necessarily something we are having more of, other than we're just more aware of it these days.
Okay. And then two other questions. Does this eventually, it sounds like we're outfitting eventually every TI, every, I guess, off ramp with the cameras. That's the intent.
Yeah, that's our intent.
Does this become a standard for ADOT? And so all future construction projects then are built with this and at least the infrastructure to put the stuff in place?
That is our intent with the program.
And how about a cost per traffic interchange? Is there an estimated cost of what the equipment and the added infrastructure is?
I would have to get back with you on that. I know the costs continue to fluctuate with the market, but we can definitely get you an average cost per interchange if you'd like.
Yeah, just be interesting to know that. I mean, it's really, really important. This is just one of the. It's a lot cheaper to put in the infrastructure than it is to pay for the fatalities and the accidents, and so clearly it's a needed piece of infrastructure component in the design. It's just one of those things that would be interesting to understand the additional cost that we see as taxpayers because of an issue that occurs like this?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Mayor Orsborn, just to piggyback on that. So as really we look out building the freeway system, or we look at these projects, and really to underscore the importance of Prop 400 and soon Prop 479, really the expansion of the wrong way detection system, and for that matter, other elements that you see with freeway projects is so critical. And so we're fortunate here in Maricopa County to have that funding source because there's so many of these different components that actually get embedded into the overall project. So we focus a lot of times on adding capacity or really optimizing for traffic, but there's a lot of these smaller components that make a huge difference as part of these projects.
Yeah. Yep. Appreciate that. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Gallego.
Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging this body's contribution towards funding. Will you talk about at the state level, how is that funded and how that would go forward? And then would it be accurate to say 479 will allow complete build out in the county, in Maricopa County, of ADOT freeways?
That I know we'll be working with MAG to understand what type of funding will be allowed for the county area. However, I know on the state side, we continue to just incorporate it into projects where we can.
Madam Chair, Mayor Gallego, the short answer for the 479 and the regional freeway system is that is absolutely our intent to cover the entire of the freeway network. So our systems management and operations plan, our ITS plan, actually identified this as one of the elements to continue to expand out. We're in the process of updating that plan, but we anticipate that that will be one of the core areas, and certainly work closely with our partners at ADOT too to identify opportunities, much like Susan sort of talked about, these one-off projects. If it's going to be quite some time between now and the time that we're actually going to get out there and do a major capital overhaul, that's when we look for funding opportunities to push these projects to do a more ITS or wrong way driver focused improvement project along those corridors. So certainly that's an ongoing conversation, that's something that we'll continue to look at and figure out how we can really accelerate or advance some of those components.
Wonderful. And excuse me, for outside, for communities that are not lucky to have a sales tax like we do, what is the funding source?
That is typically part of our federal projects that will have a component that will cover the wrong way. Some of it is we are looking at the HSIP program. It really just varies based on projects, but we're looking for those, particularly in the urban areas is where we're kind of rolling out first. And you'll hear some of like I-19 actually is deploying a project that you'll hear that we've got some wrong way down on that corridor near the Tucson area. So that's one of the first ones outside of the Phoenix area that we're getting deployed.
Thank you.
I think Mayor Gallego, your point is worth repeating, which is ADOT is so under-resourced in this state that this is an illustration of where that disparity happens, because we have, fortunately, you all have led voters to approve that here. We have this system here, but it's not been part of ADOT's resourcing, which gets to the bigger question of how does ADOT get resourced into the future?
Yeah, this would fall under the modernization category of ADOT funding. So you have modernization, preservation, and expansion is kind of the three buckets for that federal component. And so when and where it would be appropriate and available is when it would get programmed in. So unfortunately, probably not as often as it's needed and necessary. But that does bring me to an additional question, which is, are there other safety uses for this type of technology, like debris in the roadway or disabled vehicle? A safety challenge? Are we utilizing the cameras for additional uses?
These particular cameras we have got set up just for the wrong way detection. Some of them actually get a dual purpose for helping with presence detection, which is our normal traffic signal operations. But as you're aware, there are also programs out there now that we're actually investigating right now that actually have AI to detect debris, stalled vehicles that can provide notifications also to us. So we're right now looking at several of those platforms to see how well they work, and have mixed results, but we see opportunities there in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Daniels. Any additional comments or questions? Thank you so much again.
We will move on to item 7, State Route 30 Center Segment Implementation Overview. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Velvet Matthew, Freeway Engineer Program Manager, and will be joined by Troy Seglitz, ADOT's SR 30 Project Manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, Chair Whately and members of the Transportation Policy Committee. I'm here to present the implementation overview for the State Route 30 Center segment. And presenting with me today is Troy Seglitz, who is the ADOT Project Manager for the study phase of the center segment. We will start with a brief overview of the center segment and talk about the updates of the current activities that are underway. And then we will discuss the implementation alternatives for 30 and the proposed alternatives that are recommended to move forward. So let's start with the overview. I'd like to talk about the entire State Route 30 corridor first, though, to provide some perspective. So State Route 30 is located in the Southwest Valley. It is a brand new freeway that will span from State Route 85 to Interstate 17. It is parallel to Interstate 10, and it is often referred to as the I-10 reliever. The State Route 30 will cross the cities of Phoenix, Avondale, Goodyear, Buckeye, and Maricopa County. For planning purposes, the corridor was divided into 3 segments: the west, the center, and the east. And today we will be focusing on the center segment, which starts at Loop 303 to the west and connects to Loop 202 South Mountain to the east. Now, a little bit of history of how we got to where we are today. State Route 30 was first identified as part of the 2003 Regional Transportation Plan, which was the basis for Proposition 400. In 2005, ADOT initiated the study for the center segment, which included the scoping and environmental phase. In 2008, unfortunately, we experienced the Great Recession, so that resulted in the deferral of the construction of the center segment beyond the funding horizon for Proposition 400. The study then went on hold and experienced several years of delay. In 2017, as part of the rebalance of the freeway program, components of State Route 30 were brought back into the program. In 2019, ADOT completed the design concept report and the environmental assessment for the center segment. In 2020, as part of the rebalance of the freeway program, construction unfortunately was deferred outside of the funding horizon for Prop 400. But there was an increase in funding for the center segment for advanced right-of-way acquisition and utility relocation. ADOT began those activities shortly thereafter, and I'd like to give you an update on where those activities are today. So the center segment requires the acquisition of 433 parcels. That is a massive undertaking. With the guidance and approval of this body, ADOT created an innovative approach. They call it the right-of-way management plan that strategized and prioritized acquisitions and also took into consideration parcels that had long acquisition times, such as dairy farms. This approach has been extremely successful, and ADOT intends to use this on future projects where right-of-way acquisition is not straightforward. So to get into the numbers a little bit, as of March, ADOT has acquired 52% of that 433 parcels. They are also currently in the process of acquiring 18% more. So combined, that is a total of 70% of the 433 parcels have either been acquired or in the process of being acquired. That is a great accomplishment. We have 30% of the parcels remaining that still have to start the acquisition process, but the majority of those are located in the western half of the center segment. ADOT is currently coordinating with APS on their 96-inch Palo Verde water line. SR 30 crosses that water line at 4 locations. Currently, APS is at 90% design on the easternmost crossing, and we anticipate construction to begin later this year. ADOT and APS will continue to coordinate on the remaining 3 crossings, and we anticipate that the construction to complete all 4 crossings will take approximately 5 years. The main reason for that is that there are 2 very limited construction windows in which this type of construction can be performed in during a calendar year, and that window is only for 1 month long in duration. Yes, we can't interrupt service, so the main reason. And lastly, ADOT is currently in final design for the 97th Avenue to Loop 202 South Mountain projects. ADOT initiated final design in October of last year and is anticipating 2 years to complete design, with a bid advertisement for construction scheduled in the late winter of 2026 or early spring of 2027. So construction is anticipated to begin in the summer of 2027 and take approximately 3 years to complete. And with that, I will now hand it over to Troy, who will talk about the keys to implementation.
Thank you, Velvet, Madam Chair, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. There are several areas. Oh, gotta remember to do the clicker. There are several areas that need to be addressed prior to construction. Velvet's already talked about a few of those. As mentioned earlier, ADOT's been working to acquire the needed right-of-way for the entire SR 30 corridor. All of the land that the freeway needs to be built on must be acquired and cleared before construction activity can begin. And as Velvet mentioned, we're nearly 70% complete with the acquisition of the right-of-way, but to continue the acquisition process will require additional funding over the next 2 years. There are also a number of significant utilities in the SR 30 corridor that need to be addressed. Most notably, there are some very large transmission power lines in the corridor. These cross at 4 different locations on the future SR 30 center segment freeway. Some of these range between 230 kilovolts to 500 kilovolts in size. So they're the massive towers that you see. By way of comparison, a lot of the power lines that you see as you're driving down the road, those are about 12 kilovolt to 69 kilovolts. So these are very large relocations. They take a long time to move. And in some cases up to 7 years, in most cases up to 7 years to plan, design, and relocate those facilities. So again, there's 4 locations where these power lines cross the corridor. Beginning on the west end, you'll notice that near the future interchange with the 303 freeway, we've got 1 location, another location near the Agua Fria River, and then the other 2 near 97th and 99th Avenues. Additionally, Velvet mentioned the 8-foot water line that goes from the 91st Avenue water treatment plant out to the Palo Verde nuclear generating power station. Very important facility that must be protected. This water line cannot be relocated. It must be protected in place. And then as Velvet mentioned, right now we are in final design for the 99th Avenue crossing. That's at about 90% now. We expect that to go to construction later this year, with the other 3 crossings following soon after. And then as Velvet mentioned earlier, the design concept report and environmental document were completed nearly 6 years ago. So it's already been that long. Some of the assumptions that were made during the design concept report and environmental process anticipated that some regional drainage facilities would be in place prior to construction of the SR 30 corridor. Some of those have not yet materialized. So some of the assumptions that are in the design concept report will need to be updated, particularly as it relates to drainage. And so you can see on the screen here, we've got miles of drainage channels, multiple retention ponds, and several outfalls to the Agua Fria, to the Salt River. All of those need to be reevaluated before construction and final design and construction can begin. So funding is obviously a key to all of this. Um, right now, we've touched on a few of these items. There's already been a lot of dedicated funding that you all have provided for the acquisition of right-of-way. Again, additional funding will be needed to continue that process and finish with the goal to be done within the next 2 years. We need to continue working on protection of the Palo Verde water line, as well as relocation of those large transmission corridors. And then we need to look at possibly advancing the design so that we can address some of those outdated assumptions that we discussed previously. So what have we done to try to strategize our plan to move this forward? So back in January, MAG staff, along with several key ADOT technical teams, convened to hold a workshop to look at how to best implement the SR30 freeway so that we can efficiently deliver it in the early phases of the Proposition 479 program. So we looked at a number of alternatives. Some of these we've already just covered, but there were a number of others that were considered as well, including advancing some of the bridge construction. And then we also wanted to look at what's the best method to construct the corridor itself. So in terms of advancing some of the construction of the bridges, as you can see on the screen here, there's a large number of bridges that are needed along this corridor at the various cross streets, some of the canals and drainage facilities, as well as rivers, including a very long bridge at the Agua Fria River that's over a mile long. So some of these bridges are going to take multiple years to construct. And so what we wanted to do was look at, do we want to consider having separate bridge construction projects that we could procure, get out there, have them constructed, and then as the freeway is constructed, it would then connect to those bridges. What we found as we talked about this and looked into it a little bit further is it's likely to lead to some higher implementation costs. We would have to procure multiple designers, multiple contractors. We would lose some economy of scales that you get when you have larger construction projects, when you try to break it into smaller pieces. And then additionally, there is the potential that some of these bridges would be in place for several years before any traffic ever gets to it. So you would have bridges that are in place for a long time and not being used. So then we also looked at the order of the construction of the corridor itself. Is it better to build from the ends on the east and west and work toward the middle, or work from the east end and work toward the west continuously? So originally we were looking at the 5 different segments for construction. As Velvet mentioned earlier, the 97th Avenue to Loop 202 construction is already in final design, not construction. Hopefully it'll go to construction in the next couple of years. But once that's constructed, we would then have a continuous point from 97th Avenue over to the 202, and then traffic could access the remainder of the freeway system. What ends up happening, though, is we start looking at separating out the next segments of construction. If we were to go to the west end, you end up with discontinuous traffic flows. So you'll end up with a section that has very little traffic, and then the section from 97th to 202 would carry more traffic. It also would complicate some of the maintenance of traffic when you're working on the ends. Now you're affecting traffic on both sides instead of just one. And so it ends up creating more delays and complications for traffic. So again, as you can see here, if we worked on that western segment, it's unlikely that it would carry much traffic until that full connection is made. One of the major benefits of the SR30 corridor is the fact that it will relieve a lot of traffic from I-10. And until you have that more continuous connection, it's not going to relieve as much traffic. And so eventually the connection would be made, but it would take several years. So now what we wanted to do, let's look at what would happen if we looked from east to west. So the first thing to note is you'll see that we've taken 2 of the 5 segments and condensed them. So now we've got 4 construction segments. The first segment would be that 97th to 202 segment that's in final design. And then we would have 3 more follow-on projects instead of 4. So that would increase the efficiency of design and construction, as well as hopefully reduce the amount of time that it would take to implement the corridor. But some of the additional benefits are it provides better regional traffic operations and continuous traffic flow as projects become online. And I'll walk you through a series of maps here. Uh-oh. Okay, so we talked about implementing that first segment between 97th and 202. And so all of the traffic between 97th and 202 has a continuous path to work to get toward the central metropolitan core. And then as we go to the next segment, now you go all the way to Dysart and you have continuous path all the way to the 202 and accessing the regional freeways. And then continuing on now from Estrella, and then finally you have the Loop 303 system interchange. So the key point there again is that you're not separating the traffic flow. You're keeping it all continuous, and as elements of the freeway come online, traffic will continue to flow. There's no need to get on and off of a freeway facility. So what are our recommendations? So we've gone through a number of items here. Our first recommendation is we think we should consider continue with the concept of constructing from the east to the west for the corridor. With that, combining the two segments that we discussed so that we have 4 construction segments instead of 5, which should help with some of the construction efficiencies and economies of scale. We need to prioritize continuation of the right-of-way acquisition process with the goal of being finished within the next 2 years so that construction can begin. And then we need to address those major utilities. Those large transmission power lines, which are going to take up to 7 years to design, plan, relocate. And then we've also got to protect that APS Palo Verde water line. Additionally, there's a number of other utilities in the corridor. Another recommendation that we're making is that we would initiate the final design process for the remainder of the corridor. So again, right now we've just got 1 segment. So initiate design for the other 3 segments. Part of that would look at updating a lot of the assumptions that were made during the design concept report, including all of the drainage assumptions. And then concurrently with the final design, some of the other utilities that are impacted, smaller power line relocations, water, sewer, irrigation, some of those other things can be going concurrently with the final design process.
So, based on the recommended alternative implementation alternatives, as well as the timeline that it will take to construct the center segment, we are recommending the following schedule. The construction will span both phase 1 and phase 2 of the RSTIP. So 97th Avenue to Loop 202 South Mountain would begin construction in the summer of 2027. Dysart to 97th Avenue would begin in 2029. Estrella Parkway to Dysart will begin in 2031. And then the final project of Loop 303 to Estrella Parkway would begin in 2033. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Velvet and Troy. Appreciate the presentation. You know, I'm never envious of those that sit in the room that have to determine the programming for a project this complex, and with the right of way and the utilities and drainage, everything that goes into it. So we appreciate this presentation today. Are there questions or comments from the committee members? Yes, Vice Mayor Garland.
Thank you, Chair. When I was reading through the documents, I didn't see anything, and it could be I'm new, so don't understand all of this with as far as archaeological sites. What do you do when you come across those? Who do you reach out for, and what are you looking for, and how does that figure into the timing?
Madam Chair and members of the Transportation Policy Committee. So as part of the environmental process, that is where ADOT has gone about and gone and done the research to find if there are any. And at that time, if sites are identified, then a mitigation plan is set into place that could take part during final design or as part of construction. So that is definitely taken into consideration.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor Osborne.
Chair. Yep. Thank you. I think all of us on the west side are asking, how can we make it go faster? And I'm serious about that.
I have an idea.
Yes.
I'm super controversial when I say this, but I bring it up every now and again. And that is, this is a perfect corridor for us to explore a public-private partnership that would allow us to use private dollars to accelerate both the construction and free up additional construction dollars. It's not going to get cheaper to build this thing if we, have to drag it out for 10 years, regardless of which segment it is. Historically, this hasn't been an option for us, given some of our state statutes. But this is a perfect corridor for us to explore some type of creative financing. I say toll road and people get like so up in arms, but if this is something that's needed today, and in 10 years we're going to be desperate for it. I think about, what's happening out in the Far East Valley with State Route 24. Why aren't we exploring some of these types of ideas and there's been we have plenty of examples of the wrong way to do it across the country, but we have a lot of really good examples now of the right way to do it. And so I would love for us to explore those types of options, given if there's the political will to do that at the state level.
Thank you. Did you have any additional questions or comments, Mayor?
Just reiterating, how do we make it go faster?
Chair Wheatley, members of the TBC, I'll jump in and handle it. And then maybe if Velvet or Troy have some technical aspects to add on. So as we're looking at acceleration for construction, there's a number of considerations. Part of the reason why we wanted to articulate all the challenges today is because those challenges don't necessarily go away regardless of what delivery mechanism you're looking at. For example, some of the drainage challenges are still going to be there. It's still going to take time. Even if we were to work with a P3 design build development firm, they would still have to go through the process to figure those out. The water line continues to be a huge challenge. And really, there's not a whole lot that can be done there because they're really subject to the schedule that the dry up periods, essentially. And then Troy touched on.
Can I just interrupt and ask a question on that? Can that be bridged instead of just an opening and an encasement?
Great question.
In some cases, yes, and we are looking at those as options. So there are those three crossings that are not yet in construction. So the ones that are to the west, those are all at locations where there are bridges. Now we still have to go through the process of working with APS to make sure that water line is sufficiently protected in place, but it may not need that full expensive encasement that takes a little bit longer. We've been really focused on that one crossing near 99th Avenue because that's the one that's closest to the first segment that's going to construction. That one, there's no bridge there. So essentially the way it's being protected is it's going to have essentially an underground bridge. So you won't see it, but it's going to be protected by a structure over the water line. That water line was designed so that it cannot take any more load on top of it other than what's there today. So you literally have to either encase it with reinforced concrete and steel or do some sort of an arch structure, which is what the current concept is.
Okay.
And then Mayor Osborne, too, the last point I just want to emphasize, too, is some of the power lines, the utility relocation, that is also going to present a challenge just from time, regardless of who's implementing. And then I think there's the other question of the sort of delivery mechanism, the financing that Ms. Daniels had spoken about. And we'll talk about it as part of the next agenda item, but financing will require money to fund the financing, right? And so one could argue that perhaps we're going to save money from doing it as one large project, but at the same time, we're going to have to issue debt to be able to cover a $3.4 billion project, which is what the total sum of construction. And so, just as we weighed those alternatives with ADOT, this is the proposed. I mean, if this body wants us to go back to ADOT and see what that might look like, ultimately it's ADOT's call how it would get delivered in the feasibility. But when you're also looking at a $3.4 billion project, you're looking at a limited number of construction contractors that can do it. There's some potential impact in price, and then there's also impact in terms of the amount of resources that would be required at once, which would have a net impact on what other projects we could do around the system. And so it's all about trade-offs. We'll talk about that a little bit more as part of the next agenda item, but that's just another element to consider.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. Love the idea of maybe some creative financing or a P3 concept, and I think we're only talking about the piece between 303 and 202, and that gives us a center segment that benefits anybody that is trying to get around Phoenix, but getting to Phoenix, you're gonna dump everybody that's diverting from I-10 down to the 202 or down to the State Route 30 onto the 202, and then creating this massive bottleneck at the 202 and I-10. And I know I'm not, you're the planner. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but just wanting to say this out loud and make sure everybody understands. We're talking about a 10-year project for just the center segment. That doesn't include the segment that connects to Phoenix, and it doesn't include the segment that connects to 85, where there's a massive amount of growth going at the same time. So we've got to get really creative really quick. And this isn't the only project, and I know we're harping on this one because it's the one in front of us, but there's the 24, and there's the 303 and 60 interchange, and you just go around the Metro Phoenix area. There are so many needs, and we've got to get really, really creative on how we fix this stuff, because we can't sit in traffic jams for another 10 years when we've told people we're going to fix this with a Prop 479. So I appreciate the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Additional questions, comments, any online? If not, thank you again for the presentation. We'll move on to the update on the, oh yes, I'm sorry, Mayor Pizzillo.
No, I just want to echo Mayor Osborne's comments. You're right. They're not going to be happy 10 years from now. If it's going to take 10 years, it'll be outdated by the time it's built. So it'll be all kinds of money spent that, to be honest with you, it won't be of any use because we'll already be outdated. So we got to figure something else out there because they're frustrated out there. I know on the west side with the traffic we have, like I say, I echo his comments. And if we don't figure something out, this is going to get worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Update on the development of Proposition 479 Freeway Life Cycle Program. This item's on the agenda for information discussion will be presented by John Bullen, our Assistant Executive Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the TPC. So this item really builds off the previous one, as well as the conversation that we initiated back in February. So just as a brief reminder, we established these life cycle management programs as financial management tools to implement the projects within the RSTEP. Today, we're here to talk about the freeway program itself. We talked about a lot of those concepts back in February, and so this really represents the first iteration or the first version of the program that we wanted to walk through today. So real quick, as a reminder, when we're talking about building out the Prop 479 freeway program, there's really three primary objectives that we have to consider. First, we have state statutes that require that we build a fiscally constrained program. What does that mean? It means that over the 20-year life of the sales tax, over the term of the sales tax, our projected expenditures have to be in balance with our anticipated revenues. We also need to go through the process of establishing the near-term project sequencing. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of the veto from a few years back is that everything is much more condensed than we otherwise wanted. And so we sit here today in fiscal year 2025. The sales tax starts collecting in fiscal year 2026. And so in transportation terms, as you all know, that is an overnight element. So we need to get the program in place so we can start to get some of those projects queued up. And then, of course, conditions have changed. Things have changed since we put the RSTIP together back in 2021. And so we need to address some of those changes. So I wanted to walk you through the first draft program here today. Just as a quick reminder, we had talked about this back in February, but we are using revenue projections that were generated basically over the fall and the winter. This is a standard practice. We do that as part of the normal Prop 400 program. We are following that same course of action. In order to get the program to be balanced, again, we are developing this program in the midst of historic construction cost increases. We had to look for every opportunity for savings to build a financially balanced program that we could. One of the outcomes of that, or the consequences, if you will, is that the draft program here before you today does not include any debt service expenses. So there is no bonding built in the program. Again, that was a method to bring it into balance. And we are also assuming some degree of construction cost stabilization over the next 20 years, as well as cost containment with these projects. We're really building that in via the long-term construction rates, going at a percentage lower over the long term than perhaps we've seen in the last couple of years, assuming that there will be some degree of a market correction, or that we will be able to identify cost savings measures on some of these projects. So the full agenda, or the full program, is contained within your agenda item, but I wanted to highlight a few elements of that. I wanted to first start with project changes, of which we basically have project changes for 4 projects, as you see displayed on the screen. Wanted to briefly touch on those changes. So the first one has to do with really Loop 101 around I-10. We have a Prop 400 project set to hit the street this summer to construct a designated or direct HOV ramp between Loop 101 and I-10. As we had talked about in February, we are recommending that we combine the Loop 101 at 91st Avenue project with that one, as well as improvements at I-10 and 83rd and I-10 and 91st Avenue. This will result in significant cost savings. It will also result on less disruptions on the traveling public. The next one is in the South Valley, I-10 Wild Horse Pass. So a few years back, the legislature appropriated money to improve I-10 between Phoenix and Casa Grande. There's actually state appropriation money to do this interchange upgrade. So our recommendation is that that upgrade occur as part of the Prop 400 funded project, and really the larger ADOT effort, if you will, and is slated to occur sometime this summer. Up in the Northwest Valley, currently in the RSIP, we have a new interchange at Loop 303 in Litchfield. We've been working with our partners at ADOT and City of Surprise, among other stakeholders, to identify if there's another opportunity or a better interchange up there. We've recently completed a comprehensive technical analysis. ADOT just went out to the public and really for improving traffic conditions at Loop 303 and US 60, which is a major challenge today. The Loop 303 and 155th Avenue interchange performs better. So our recommendation is to swap the Loop 303 at Litchfield with Loop 303 and 155th Avenue. And then the final change, this is really an outfall of the study that was accepted a few months ago, the I-10 corridor, freeway corridor study. We have a number of projects to improve the inner loop of I-10 there. Really, the changes reflected is how we intend on implementing those projects. First one would be really dealing with the mini stack and State Route 51. The second one would be improving I-10, basically from the tunnel down to the split, including improving access to the airport. So this aligns with the study that we've talked about at this committee. This would be turned over to ADOT to initiate formal scoping and environmental work. And as they go through that process, if there is an alternative sort of implementation schedule, we'll bring it back through the TPC at that time. Next, I want to touch on some of the phase 1 projects. So the way the draft program has things slated, the first Prop 479 project out the gate would be construction of the system interchange at Loop 303 and I-17. This project is in final design now, slated to be completed over the next month or so. And with approval of the Prop 479 freeway program, ADOT could initiate this for construction this summer. We have several other projects in fiscal year 2026 that are proposed. We have the general purpose lanes on Loop 303 between Lake Pleasant Parkway and I-17. Originally, we had assumed that to be as part of the Loop 303 I-17 system interchange project. Based on feedback from ADOT, they've asked that they be decoupled and that the Loop 303 general purpose lanes trail the system interchange project. We also have funding for the construction of I-10 and Jackrabbit Trail in the Southwest Valley, and then completion of State Route 24 between Loop 202 and Ironwood Drive in the Southeast Valley in fiscal year 2026. And then in fiscal year 2027, we just covered State Route 30, that first section between 97th Avenue and Loop 202, and then completing really the Loop 202 Santan widening between I-10 and Loop 101 down in the Chandler area. Then lastly, I just wanted to touch on some of the notable project development activities that are early in the draft program. We have a number of scoping and environmental projects that would kick off. Just to underscore, these are very major undertakings. These will really set the footprint for what those projects are, establish how those projects will get implemented. Of course, we have the I-10 tunnel, so the split that I had just talked about. We have the first section of the I-17 rehabilitation, reconstruction between I-10 Maricopa and I-10 Papago. We have SR30 Western segment, US 60 widening out in the East Mesa Apache Junction area, and then scoping environmental for the ultimate system interchange at Loop 303 and US 60. And then a number of projects going to final design. Included in that are the new proposed interchange at Loop 303 and 155th Avenue, the State Route 30 final design that Velvet and Troy just presented on, Loop 101, or excuse me, Loop 202 down in the Chandler area, and then the I-17 West Connection project. So just looking ahead, so where do we land from a financial perspective? Based on our preliminary cash flow, we are ending fiscal year 2046 with a very small fund balance, $370 million total. That sounds like a lot, but in the freeway world, that is not a very large fund balance. It's also important to note that some of the project expenditures will actually trail beyond 2046, but they will be supported by those ongoing revenues. So federal formula funds, HERF funds, not necessarily another continuation of the dedicated half-cent sales tax just for purposes of planning. And I want to underscore this last point. There's very little contingency left. We have squeezed every ounce of contingency out of the program to manage through the historic construction cost increases that we could. We are very tight, but there is little room left. So as things evolve over this next year, we'll have more insight, whether that's on the federal revenue side, whether that's on the sort of economy side. We'll have additional perspective. The good news is that we update this program annually. And so what transpires over this next year, we can capture in the next year's update. But I do want to underscore the point, we are very tight as part of the program. Depending on the feedback we get from you all today, we intend on making any necessary adjustments to the program. And we could be looking at moving forward for recommended approval as quickly as May, which would really set in motion some of those projects that I had talked about. So with that, Madam Chair, be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation, John. Feedback from the, thank you. Councilmember Haney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, I just want to applaud you on behalf of my residents for the effort that you've taken for almost a few years now. But specifically, one of the things you mentioned was the 155th alignment, and a lot of our residents provided some feedback on that, and I think it's going to be such a value. It's closer to that intersection that already is experiencing those challenges, and as we move forward through additional solutions, I think it's really going to help provide some relief while we look at the other long-term solutions program later in the phases. So I just want to thank you and your team for your work on that. We're very appreciative. We're very eager to see it continue to move forward. I have to admit, I'm cautiously optimistic with all the other variables, obviously, that come into play for this. But I'm excited to see this mentioned and hopefully it continues to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Haney. Additional feedback. Going to check online as well. Okay. Again, we appreciate the presentation, John.
Thank you.
We will move on to item 9, update on the State Route 74 corridor transportation study. And it is on the agenda for information and discussion. Will be presented by Quinn Castro, transportation engineer. Thank you, Quinn.
Thank you, Chair Wheatley, members of Transportation Policy Committee. I'm here to present an update on the State Route 74 corridor transportation study. and will provide information on study background, progress, and then schedule and next steps. So first, to orient you to the location of the study, the blue line in the Northwest Valley is the State Route 74 corridor. As you can see here, it's approximately 30 miles of a rural 2-lane undivided highway. This is a corridor planning study at the State Route 74 and US 60 intersection and travels east looking for improvements at the intersection with Lake Pleasant Parkway and continuing to the system interchange with I-17. The intent is to assess the existing and future travel demands on State Route 74 and the surrounding roadways, and then use that analysis to inform future improvements. MAG member agencies, stakeholders include the Arizona Department of Transportation, Maricopa County Department of Transportation, and then the cities of Phoenix, Surprise, and Peoria. The study began work in December 2023 and is anticipated to be completed later this year. So the State Route 74 is primarily a 2-lane rural highway with occasional left turns and intersections, as well as 1-mile passing lane segments. We have existing signalized intersections here at Lake Pleasant Parkway and the Arizona Game and Fish Department headquarters. There's numerous informal driveways, as access control does not currently exist along the corridor. And then we have a 65-mile-per-hour posted speed limit on the western segment and 55 miles per hour on the eastern segment, with the breakpoint between the two being at approximately 87th Avenue. So the study began with looking at crash data along the corridor. In the 5-year period reviewed, there were 158 crashes. The majority of these were attributed to animal strikes and to certain access points. So let's take a closer look at that data. First, the crash concentration. So a high number of crashes are concentrated at the intersections shown here. So the Bureau of Land Management off-highway vehicle access intersection, Castle Hot Springs intersection, Old Lake Pleasant Parkway, 87th Avenue, and the Lake Pleasant Parkway intersection. Then these are the crashes located at intersections or access points along the corridor. Each of those diamonds represent a crash along the corridor. Today, there are 11 intersections in total, but again, there are many driveways and not formally designated access points. And then lastly, this shows the locations of animal-involved crashes. State Route 74 is a rural roadway, meaning that there is no barrier or fencing along the shoulder, just open to the desert. So when wild animals are looking to cross, they're often involved in crashes with vehicles. So next, I'll update the study progress, and this is information that's been shared with our study stakeholder staff. We're going to go through existing conditions and our modeling results. Starting with corridor population density in 2024, the land surrounding the corridor primarily contains less than 500 people per square mile, with greater population density shown across I-17. In 2050, it's anticipated that the population will grow primarily along the south side of the corridor, with density increasing in some areas to 500, 1,000, or 2,000 people per square mile. You'll see the developments near TSMC are shown up to 15,000 people. So similarly with corridor employment density, currently we're looking at the range of 100 to 2,000 employees. And then once you get closer to, less than 100 people per square mile. But then closer to I-17, we have those areas in green, which are in the 100 to 200 employers. And then in 2050, so dramatic increase here, it's expected that employment along the corridor is going to grow many more in that 100 to 2,000 range, as well as 2,000 to 5,000, and even 10,000 to 20,000 close to TSMC. That is a 10-fold increase. So MAG recently had a study with area stakeholders and presented this following information. This is a simplified version of a cut line analysis. So the gradient line here shows number of vehicles per day traveling along the corridor in 2050. Traveling east to west, west to east, the number of vehicles using the corridor is expected to increase to about 15,500 per day in both directions on the west end, up to 62,000 vehicles per day near I-17. Similarly, we looked at travel to and from the corridor. So we had 15,700 vehicles per day in the west end, increasing to 156,000 vehicles per day in the east end. That 179,000 miles, for reference, is I-17 traffic. So then we split the corridor into 4 areas of analysis: west, central, northeast, and southeast. Please note that the southeast area contains TSMC. So the first set of arrows here show travel trips per day between each of the boundary areas. Then I wanted to show the number of trips traveled from one end of the corridor to the other. So a little bit less than what we had seen before, but these are the people that are traveling the full length of the corridor every day. And then again, moving west to east, we looked at the anticipated number of trips within each of the boundary areas. So these are trips that begin and end within the same boundary area. And lastly, this is the number of trips to and from each of those boundary areas to the rest of the metro area. So for example, that 99,000 you see in the center segment is from all of the metro area, people that will be traveling to and from that area in the middle. So some key takeaways from our study. Traffic modeling reveals that most travel demand on the corridor is north-south and not east-west, which we had initially anticipated. The traffic modeling shows that between Agua Fria and I-17, the State Route 74 corridor will need to be a 4-lane facility by 2050. However, between US 60 and Agua Fria, the 2-lane section will operate acceptably until 2050. However, beyond 2050, the entire corridor will need to be a 4-lane facility. So next, I'll talk about our schedule as well as next steps. So this is a timeline of our study activities, and you'll see we are at the existing and future conditions analysis, and we are currently preparing for a virtual public meeting to be held at the end of May. Then we will work with our study stakeholders to develop a corridor vision, goals, and alternatives, with a second virtual public meeting to be held this fall, followed by a final report with implementation plan that we will bring back to this committee. And with that, I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you. Questions for Quinn? You left us all speechless. Any online? Thank you for the presentation, Quinn.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Our favorite item on the agenda, Samantha Klakulak will give us our presentation on the legislative update. She is our governmental relation project manager. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Chair Wheatley. Hopefully nothing too exciting this week. We are in the 14th week of the legislative session. Committee hearings are over, and we're starting to see more of that floor action happening throughout the week. We're tracking bills that are still moving through the process and who have passed out of committee in the opposite chamber and still have the ability to move up to the governor's desk. Budget discussions haven't started yet, but the Finance Advisory Committee will be meeting tomorrow, April 17th, to discuss updated revenue projections, which will kickstart those initial budget negotiations. With that, here's an update on bills that we're tracking still. SB 1086, Transportation System Performance ADOT, did pass out of the House Transportation Committee on a party line vote and was heard in the Committee of the Whole last Thursday. The bill has not been placed on a third read calendar as of yet. Again, to reiterate, this bill is creating new performance factor definitions and weights that circumvent ADOT's current project and programming process. The process that ADOT uses aligns with federal laws, so the language in the bill would jeopardize current and future programs and federal funding. Prop 479 is also linked to this bill and would circumvent your ability as policymakers to select quality outcome-based projects and could jeopardize certain transit projects in the region as well. Lastly, HCR 2035 and its companion SCR 1004 vehicle mileage tracking tax prohibitions. Still, HCR 2035 is awaiting that third read vote and with the ability to be flipped with the Senate resolution, but there has been no additional movement at this point. As we've discussed, these are now identical pieces of legislation and could be flipped and third read without having to make their way through that opposite chamber, expediting the process for passage. These resolutions, if sent to and approved by voters, could, as we've kind of discussed today, be a potential roadblock in the ability to modernize future funding for the declining HERF revenues, as well as impacting MAG's air quality efforts and planning. That completes my report, Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Samantha. Questions for Samantha? No questions. Thank you. Appreciate the update. Next item is comments from the committee. Actually, excuse me, I jumped ahead a little bit. Request for future agenda items. Any request for a future agenda item? If not, we will move on to comments from the committee. None. And that concludes our meeting today. Our next meeting for the Transportation Policy Committee will be Wednesday, May 21st, 2025 at 11:30 with no further business. Today's meeting is adjourned.